Hey the YouTube, how you guys doing today? Welcome to the Technology Entrepreneur YouTube tutorial where I would be telling you how to build $1 million company as a technology entrepreneur. Uh, my experience goes about 15 years in the corporate setup, and I have been lately doing technology entrepreneurship for the past 1.5 years. And what I've learned in the last 1.5 years around technology is what I'm going to be discussing today. And I hope this session, comes out as a useful session for you. So without further ado, I want to jump into the session itself. What I want to cover here is I want to talk to you about the technology ideas, how to scale them, and then I want to jump in a little into technology per se, and also conclude it with final thoughts on what are the pitfalls that some of the technology entrepreneurs face, and you should avoid them. So first thing first, I think the biggest thing that you need to have when you start a technology company is the idea. So the question really is, what sort of problem are you solving? Uh, is there a problem, or you're simply doing it for the sake of doing it? So the question really is not about making the first million. It's a question of solving a problem. Think about a problem in and around your community, in and around your country, locality, or across the world, whatever you think it is. Okay, then just go and solve it, and try to think if technology can help solve it. So that's the first journey, or the first step that you'll have to take. Second thing that you need to think about is, how does the idea scale? So assuming that you started off an idea in local community, how do you think that the idea can scale? And part of this is something that technology can definitely do for you, because there are technology platform which can help you scale, but there are technology platform which will not help you scale as well, because they are restricted by the delivery engine. For example, let's say you're scaling, like Facebook. You can very quickly scale because you don't need an infrastructure to scale there. But if you are scaling, for example, like Amazon, then you need some kind of an infrastructure. So scale will be different, and you need to invest a lot. So the journey is going to be slightly different in both these cases. So there are pure play technology companies which don't touch infrastructure, or the last mile in an organization, versus there are organizations which have, there is a last mile element to it. So you need to think through that. And then of course you'll have to have a revenue stream. Any company needs to have a revenue stream to scale and go to the next level. I would also think that you should start thinking really big. Most of the technology entrepreneurs don't think big, and their thoughts are limited by their own self. So don't get into that and think big. Sometimes an idea might just click. And finally, the crux of the entire presentation today is going to be technology deployment, and here I'm talking about rapid deployment. Rapid deployment primarily because that's what technology does. It lets you get your idea up and running very quickly and very rapidly, and then you take it to the next level. However, when you build a technology company, there are things that you'll have to start thinking about, and that's what we're going to discuss in the next slide. So I would like to talk to you about two things that as a technology entrepreneur you will face, which is, should you insource your product, or should you outsource it? um, Obviously, as a startup, I assume that you don't have a setup and you're starting out with an idea. So the next step for you would be, all right, how do I deploy this idea? And you need to build that idea. The easiest thing would be if you can steal an idea. And sometimes, stealing idea, maybe the terminology needs to be changed. You get inspired by an idea, might be a better terminology. But fundamentally, if you're going to take an idea from a different organization or a different country and implement it into your organization or your company, or your country, that's absolutely fine. And because the organization which has built that idea in their country or location might not have you or your country as a focus, so it's absolutely good if you just build that idea in your own scope and capacity, and by the time they sort of enter the market in your area, you're already well versed and ahead of the game. There are several companies which have already done that, and they have been very successful. The best example is really Uber's technology of taxi aggregation. If you look at Uber, by the time they started growing into other markets, there was already Didi in China, and there was Ola in India. So these companies had already grown big enough to sort of counter Uber. The same is the case with Amazon. By the time Amazon actually started entering other markets, China already had Alibaba, India already had Flipkart and sorts. So it's not a bad thing to really get inspired by an idea, because end of the day, what you're doing is you're trying to solve a problem. So that's number one thing. Uh, Number two is once you start looking at technology, how you gonna build your process and how you're gonna build your technology engine. So you could outsource it. Outsourcing has issues. The best part about outsourcing is that it's cost effective. You don't have to worry too much about cost, because somebody is already building that particular uh, uh, software development program for you, and you don't have to worry too much about investing too much money into it. So that's number one. Second is your infrastructure investments are low, so that's a plus there. Flexibility in outsourced development projects are very limited, because the outsourced unit itself might be working on other projects, and yours might not get the kind of priority which needs to be given. The same thing is with enhancements. You might struggle to enhance your product and add features to it. You'll have to have a very strong project management practice, otherwise the team's priority, which is definitely probably not sitting in the same location as yours, would be changing on a regular basis. Remember that they are also an organization, and most probably they are themselves a startup, and they've got their cost constraint. So they might take on other projects to manage their project cost, and your project will definitely suffer in that case. Also, if you're going to pivot your idea, they would charge you on a separate note. And the time to market is going to be very, very, very long, at least 3 times more than an in-sourced idea. So be prepared for that particular time frame. In-sourced technology partners will have definite advantage in terms of time to market. So I give a 3 plus. Flexibility is going to be very high here, relatively high. So I give it 2 plus. You can pivot the idea, you can change the idea if you think midway that this is not working. The cost is going to be incrementally higher here, arguably higher, I would say, because you would need to invest in the infrastructure, you would need to invest in the resources, you need to pay them salaries, and there's going to be associated cost of deployment of the project. Project management is something I've sort of left it at the stage, assuming that you would be involved in this project yourself, day in and day out. And the biggest advantage, of course, would be to technology control. So today you start over a project and you say that you want to build the backend on PHP, and tomorrow you decide that no, you want to move to Node. That's absolutely fine, because it's your team and you can do that depending on what technology you want to do. But I would argue, why would you want to do that in the first place? But I was just giving you a scenario in technology control. So moving on from in-source outsource comparisons, let's look at a few technologies that you might be encountering in your development, in web development environment. And these technologies come across everything. So when you are working on a mobile app versus a web app, these things will definitely encounter. For example, HTML, CSS are standard, so this would come in any web app or any app that's getting built, because ultimately your project's HTML pages are going to be displayed into the web browser. So your your entire web app will be running or rendering in the HTML page, and CSS, of course, is the beautifying part of it. JavaScript is the one which plays around with it. So you see those boxes popping up, you see those transitions, lovely transitions coming around, all of those tiny little things that happen when you click something happens. All those happens in JavaScript. JavaScript has lots of frameworks these days, and some of them are mentioned as Node.js, React.js, Angular 2, Ember, Backbone, and Polymer. Node.js is a very good framework. It's a micro framework in comparison to React and Angular, which are really large, huge frameworks. React's a framework which was originally developed by Facebook, and now it's been made open source. Angular 2 is developed by Google, and it's also open source. All of these projects, of course, are open source, so you can go and contribute to them as well. In the backend side, you would encounter technologies like Node.js, Python, Ruby, and PHP. These technologies would also be having their frameworks. So, for example, Node.js has Express and Happy. Python has did Django as in Flask, and Ruby has Ruby on Rails, and PHP has Laravel. Uh, the point is that in the backend technology, you might be choosing PHP over Node. I can get into a discussion around that, but to give you a very high level snippet of how you use technology, I would think that you should use technology which is best suited in rapid deployment. You wouldn't hear a lot of noise these days where people say that, all right, let's develop an SPA. SPA is a single page application, or let's develop a PWA. PWA is a progressive web app. And what an SPA does is that it has the same technology in the front end as well as back end, so the rendering becomes faster. In this particular case, you might want to use JavaScript in the front end, and you would use Node.js, which is also a JavaScript library, a runtime of JavaScript in the back end as well. And you would also use a JavaScript database like MongoDB, because you want to get your project to be rendering at a quicker pace. But I think those are questions. The questions of performance really come at a stage when you have grown to something of the size of Uber, or something of the size of Amazon, or something of the size of Walmart, not in smaller projects. Most of the smaller projects where the traffic is minimum or minimal, I think any of these technologies, any of the backend technologies will work fine. In fact, you should just look at your local environment and see which developers are available for a particular technology, and just pick them up and start building the app, rather than thinking about building it up in some kind of a sexy technology. So that was a backend journey. Personally, I think PHP is a great backend framework. It is considered an old hog here, really, because it's been around for a very, very long time, and today people don't really consider PHP to be the sexy technology, but it has got a great engine, so you should use PHP wherever you can. Ruby on Rails is another one, but Ruby on Rails is right now not doing great, so I would not recommend that. Python is another great one. The advantage is that Python is just not a web language. It is also a language which is used for Internet of Things. It is a language which is used in data mining. It's a language which is used in scientific data analysis. So there are several other things. So robotics, in bots, you name it, Python is pretty much everywhere in any kind of device, any kind of technology operated engine. So that's great, but nevertheless, you might want to choose the technology based on your local availability of skills. On the database side, I've given you kind of a recommendation. So I would generally choose a database which is existing, a small database. MySQL is a perfect database for this. It's a relatively old database, so people are aware of it. It's relational database, so the concepts are not very new, and if you don't want to choose MySQL, you can go with SQL Server or ProgressQL. Either one of them is fine. ProgressQL is slightly more robust and thus more complicated, and of course MongoDB is currently the reigning king of the databases, because it is a NoSQL database, and it is considered great for scaling. So for all big data kind of project, MongoDB is great. But the question really is, do you need big data? What are you going to do with big data? Because big data is really being operated at enterprise level organization which at least have 1 billion plus kind of market size. So you are never going to be initially as an entrepreneur getting worried about MongoDB. And let me tell you that MongoDB requires special skills. It's not an easy technology to deploy. It requires a VPS. It is complicated, and it has got its own nuances. So rather than getting caught up in the technological labyrinth, if you may, you might just want to pick technologies which can be rapid on deployment. So that's on the technology part. And a few concluding thoughts really is that don't spend too much money on branding. A lot of people will tell you, no, you have to go ahead and spend a lot of time on branding. No, I would say just branding should come on itself. You should create a great foundation, a strong foundation. That's really the crux of building an organization. uh, just so focus on your logic, focus on what will your app do, how will it solve a problem. you you need not, a lot of people I've heard talk about UX and UI and how the UX should be beautifully laid out and all of that stuff, but end of the day, that's really icing on the cake. That's not the cake itself. So you need to figure out what needs to go into the cake and how will the cake taste. So that's really the back end, that's really the logic. So take your time in discussing that and figuring that out. So that's a great foundation. Think of survival for long term. This is not a short term game. It's not a 6 months, 1 year game. It's at least 3 years of hard work and labor and toil. You'll have to sacrifice a lot of stuff that you might not have had to if you were working in a company versus being an entrepreneur. So that's something that you'll have to think about long term. Another thing is, in internet, most of the things are free. So a lot of you might want to quickly start thinking of monetization. How do I sort of make money from this particular app or this particular web web app? But remember, Facebook is free, WhatsApp is free. Any of the technologies available right now, any of the large technology houses deploy their projects free, and there are only after they hit a scale then they start making money. So Uber is not making money, Facebook is not making money. In fact, Amazon started making money very recently. So you'll have to think about making your product as free as possible so that people start accepting it. Today everybody is talking about open source. There are none of the technologies that I spoke to you about is owned by a company. Company is developing it and letting it go and let the developers build it from there. So that's a lot of change in the ecosystem. So think about free services, and of course start building with a few good partners. Don't sort of go about carpet bombing and saying that I want to acquire tens and thousands of customers and immediately go on a blitzkrieg, which you might find is easy, but eventually nothing will happen because the customers whom you really trust will not stay with you. So build a few good partners, build a few good customers, and those will then become your channel partners. They will start becoming taking you to the next level, and they start talking about your technology, your product, and that will take you to the next level. I hope you found this quick presentation really useful for a technology entrepreneurship journey. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them. I'm happy to respond back to them. Or if you think that I should focus on a particular area of technology, I'm more than happy to do that. I wanted to make this presentation as quick as possible because I didn't want to dwell on a particular area without losing interest of yours. So thank you very much. It was great, and bye bye. Have a great evening.